initially, blockchain was actually the name that was just given to the way Bitcoin works. Blockchain is the IT part, and Bitcoin was the application. If I want to give a definition to blockchain, but this is my definition, once again, there's no official definition of it, it's a digital, decentralized ledger, first. So it's a ledger. It's recording things, facts. And it serves as a single version of truth that is shared among participants in a network. And maybe you can see here that it will be useful for supply chain. Because sometimes in supply chain you have a network of participants, of suppliers and clients and partners, and you want to be using a single version of truth. So it may be useful in a few minutes. So it's a ledger. What does it make? What is it useful for? Well, it's allowing irreversible transfer and uncensorable possession of valuable digital assets. Which means, not necessarily Bitcoin, but which means an asset. So maybe one first takeaway, and I will remind it at the end, is that blockchain is not a huge database. It's not Dropbox. It's a place where you send assets. If you want to share information, there are lots of tools already existing and functioning very well. Okay? It's not, the main use of blockchain is not to share information and just plain information. Now moving on to maybe a more meta point of view, you have the internet, classic internet, which is the internet of information. Everyone in the world now is able to create their own information, send it to the world on social networks, on blogs, on what you want, and influence thousands of people just by saying something. And they don't need those trusted third parties, which were the media, the post office, and so on and so on. You find the same thing for blockchain and crypto assets, but for value. With blockchain and crypto assets, everyone is able to have their own value, uncensorable, send it all across the world in just a few minutes without needing an intermediary to do it. And this is why we often call it Internet of Value, and you will see after that there are lots of common points between the Internet and blockchain and crypto assets. So just one last thing on blockchain and crypto assets to explain a bit more what we're talking about. In fact, when we talk about blockchains, we talk about two different topics. Just like when we talk about the internet in the early 90s, we were talking about two different topics, which were internet and the intranets. We have the same distinction for blockchains. We have public blockchains, which work with cryptocurrency or crypto assets, whatever you'd like to call them. Okay? These are necessary once again. And their goal is to provide security, disruption, the fact that you can transfer value all across the world with no trusted third party. But then you also have what we call private blockchains, permission blockchain, consortium blockchains, all the terms work well. And they are kind of like intranets, meaning we like the fact that there's a decentralized network that is open and public, but maybe we can make it not open and not public and keep it to us. This is the same reasoning that we had for intranets, which is intranet is great, but there are lots of terrorists out there, so I'm going to do my own internet, which is an intranet. So you're not looking for the same value. When you're doing a private blockchain, you're usually looking for optimizing. When you're doing public blockchain or crypto asset use cases, you're actually looking for disruption. And in most cases, what I see from my work and from the different conferences I go to, most incumbent companies will stay on permission blockchain for the moment, and it's perfectly understandable because the others are very mature for the moment. And most startups from the blockchain world will focus on the public blockchain. My advice here would be, as a professional, probably look onto the permission blockchain to experiment, to try things. But from an individual perspective, and if I can foster the envy for you to go and check after more about blockchain and supply chain, the part with public blockchain and crypto asset is 100 times more interesting. Now, examples of use case, mostly in financial services, as you've understood. But we'll focus on supply chain. But you see that all the other use cases are linked to banking, to insurance, to identity. These are very promising use cases for blockchain. For supply chain, we will have some use cases that are more promising than others, which are traceability, audit, clarifying liability, and inventory. I'm first digging into some public blockchain use cases, which means that they go with cryptocurrencies. The first one has one major advantage, which is that it works. It's production ready, and it's very cheap, let's say. You can, on a blockchain, prove the integrity of data. Now, what you could do without blockchain is take any file, PDF, MP3, whatever you want, and create what we call a hash. A hash is just basically a digital fingerprint of a document. So it's a series of letters and numbers that is unique for a document. It's literally a digital fingerprint. But the problem without blockchain is that if you wanted to prove the integrity of your document, you would have to store this hash somewhere. And usually it ended up on Google Drive, iCloud, AWS, etc. Which is problematic because if you want to prove the integrity of information and you rely on a third party that can actually alter your information, there is a problem. So the use cases didn't work before the blockchain. Because what you can do with the blockchain is take your hash and insert it in, let's say, for example, a Bitcoin transaction as a metadata. What you're doing when you're doing that is you're anchoring, basically, your data on a decentralized digital ledger that no one owns, which makes it what? Well, immutable. So now you have your whole use case. You have something that proves the integrity of your document and that is immutable. This is basically a use case that allows you very low cost proof of integrity. What's it used for? Prove that you made an industrial design. Prove that you own intellectual property on something. Prove that you own graphics, for example. If you want to prove the integrity, the existence, and your ownership on data, this can be one solution. For example, the state of Geneva in Switzerland does that, uses this functionality to prove the identity cards, let's say, of companies. Now, if you ask for the register, the official register of the companies in Geneva, they will send you a proof on blockchain that your identity card that you requested is official, is the right one, no one altered it in the middle. So that's one example, but of course maybe you're more sensible to, let's say, protecting industrial design. Other public use cases for blockchains, for supply chain, sorry, they concern financial transactions. The first advantage of it is to lower the costs. So here we have the answer to the question that I've asked before. Most of you answered optimizing financial transactions. Yes. For example, I checked just right before the conference, if I send $100 from the US to Mexico, I'll get, I think, if I use Western Union, for example, I get 1,700 Mexican pesos. If I use Bitcoin, I will get 1,900. Because there is no intermediary, there's no Western Union, there's no one in the middle taking a fee. So you will get the full price of your money transfer. The second advantage of it is that it lowers delays. Of course, if you want to send money, for example, right now to Malaysia, it's going to take time. It's going to take a few days even. If you do it on a blockchain, Ethereum, Bitcoin, whatever blockchain you want to use, it's going to take maybe 5 minutes. I can literally take out my phone right now, send a transaction, and in 5 minutes, someone in Kuala Lumpur has the money. And they don't even need a bank account, which is quite huge. And the third one, and I know that some companies that I've been talking with especially in France, some top companies are thinking about using Bitcoin to avoid sanctions. Because for the moment they are using US dollars as a standard currency, but that makes them liable to US jurisdiction, and they don't like that. If they use Bitcoin, basically it makes the transfer cheaper, faster, and you're not liable to any US sanction whatsoever. So this is something that they are considering. Of course, even though they would be doing it, that's something they don't say publicly, of course. Now, moving on to some private blockchain use case, one especially that is quite classic in supply chain is you want to be able to track the merchandise, the goods that you're making flow through your supply chain. So this is a feedback from experience that we've done with a cosmetics company, and they wanted to bring value to customer. The value was transparency. We want to show you that the products we're making are fair trade. We are not enslaving people to do that. We are using biomaterials, for example, and so on and so on. Right? So this is the use case, and I think it's a use case that most of you might think about. And in this use case, what you do to use a private blockchain, well, first, you need to convince all your partners to have a server. Because once again, we are now back into private blockchains, which means kind of like intranets. You're not relying anymore on a public network. You're relying on something that you have to build. So you have to convince everyone to hold a server, an infrastructure, which is the first hard part. Of course, if you go to the bottom of this thought, having a private blockchain where you're the only one to own the blockchain is called having an Excel file, and it's basically useless. So you need other people to join your network. So once you've done that, well, you just track your goods. Once your goods get to the transporter, for example, well, the transporter is going to tell the blockchain that it's here. And there are many, many advantages of it. The advantages we're going to go through are these ones. I'll go very fast because the time is ticking, but the blockchain advantages mainly, so the first two, auditability and verifiability. We are having, together with the suppliers, the partners, the clients, and everyone, and you can even include the customer, we are having a single version of truth. It means that there are no more silos where I think something and you think something, and if there is a problem, a dispute, then it's your voice against mine. If we are all using the same ledger, this does not exist anymore. Okay, so you can audit, you can include external participants like auditors, for example, financial auditors, and you can verify, which means that if something goes wrong, you are able to go back in time and check who is liable. And for example, I know IBM has done a use case on that, and they've cut their dispute resolution time from 60 days to less than 10 days. Because basically before it's one voice against the other, and now it's just, let me check. And you go back into the blockchain and no one can basically say that, no, it was not my fault. Everyone knows it was your fault. One other advantage is automation. It goes very fast. We've seen it already with the financial transaction, for example. You can do financial transactions at lower cost very fast, and you can automate them according to conditions. These are called smart contracts, for those of you who are interested in, and I think Dan will talk about them a bit further. So you can use smart contracts to automate conditions. For example, I want to be paid when the shipment arrives to the dock. Right, well, you can program it, and you don't need a trusted third party. And the last theoretical advantage of blockchain is decentralization, which means what? Which means that from a stakeholder management's point of view, it solves political problems, not technical problems. Because I've seen sometimes, a whole industry gathered together. For example, it happened for the diamond industry. They gathered together saying, okay, we have to combat fraud and theft and blood diamonds. Let's get together and have a single version of truth of which are the right diamonds and the wrong diamonds. And then guess what? The next question is, who holds the ledger? And then, of course, everyone is like, I want to hold the ledger. And then there's no ledger. Blockchain brings a political solution. No one's holding the ledger because everyone's holding it. There's no main version. And that's the main difference with a normal ledger. So this is a political step forward, but it can help a lot of industry cooperate together in order to combat fraud. But, these are mostly theoretical advantages. And for the moment, as I've said in my introduction, this is mostly an immature technology and mostly experiments. And blockchain will mostly and oftentimes create as many problems as it solves. So let's just see them very quickly. First problem is the authenticity of information. Because as I've said, when you're using a blockchain, you're tracking digital assets. But when you're doing supply chain, you're tracking physical assets. Now there has to be a link between the two. The blockchain, if you're tracking bikes, for example, the blockchain has no clue where your bike is. So you need Internet of Things, AI, other technologies, or manual intervention to tell the blockchain that something happened. So this is a confusion that's often made. Blockchain will bring what? Proof of existence. Something existed at some point in time? Yes. Proof of integrity. It has not been changed since, but it does not bring proof of authenticity. Blockchain doesn't know if your information is wrong or right. So this is a problem for blockchain, especially for supply chain. Of course, for financial transactions, these are digital assets anyway. So there's not this problem. Confidentiality is another issue because you need to cooperate with your industry, and often what I see is that most partners will say, well, transparency is very, very good and we should go towards transparency, but for your data, not mine. Because I like opaqueness for my data. And the problem is that everyone thinks like that. So in the end, I've seen projects where everyone is in the room and wants to do a blockchain, but if possible, without sharing data. So everyone has a node, has a computer with their own data, their own Excel, and it's called, well, nothing. It's called like before, but at more cost and less efficient. Okay? So confidentiality is often a problem because people, for the moment, maybe in the future it will be right, but they don't want to cooperate on confidentiality. Network size, I will go very fast, but the fact is a blockchain is more useful the more people there are in the network, the more decentralized it is. So if you're making a blockchain alone, once again, it's called an Excel file and it has no use, literally. And if you're two, yes, maybe it's better, but still, that's not enough, and so on and so on. Governance is another problem, mostly for private blockchain projects, because you need to decide who will host an infrastructure, who will pay for the maintenance, who will support it, who has the powers, which auditors we bring in the consortium, for example. So these are all problems. And the transfer of value, last problem, but it's a big problem. Blockchain knows how to handle crypto assets or assets that are inherently existing on the blockchain, which is not the case for fiat currency like USD and Euro and Mexican pesos. Mexican pesos do not exist on blockchain for the moment. So what you're forced to do for the moment is to create a token. Everyone agrees that it represents a pesos. Then you do the transfers on the blockchain, and then you need to do a settlement on the traditional system. And you lose a bit of your value added here. So this is a great problem. Central banks, to be very transparent, central banks for the moment are thinking about it, are thinking about putting the currency on the blockchains, but it's not the case for the moment. So you're basically exchanging tokens, hoping it has value and that the traditional system will still work at the end of the day. Let me go back to the key takeaways of my presentation. I want you to go home with those thoughts. The first one is blockchain and crypto assets are linked technologies. And I really insist on that because what I see nearly all the time in the media is this blockchain is good and Bitcoin and crypto assets are bad. This is completely wrong. When you understand the technology, so of course in 40 minutes I'm not able to give you all the details about how it works, but when you understand the technology, you understand that you can barely do one without the other. So you can, but you're losing a lot of the value added. Second thing is basically the following of what I'm saying. Disruptive use case need a crypto asset, which means that other use cases still have a value, but they are not disruptive. Okay? Third thing, I've said it a few times right now, building your own blockchain is like building an Excel sheet. Do not do it. You're just wasting time and money. Fourth, supply chain, yes, can be optimized. This is an answer, especially for auditing purposes, for ensuring the ethical provenance of your good and so on and so on. But blockchain cannot trace physical assets alone. You need other technologies, and I think Dan will introduce some of them. And automating asset transfer through blockchain need the user for the moment, and I hope it will be better in the future, but for the moment, it needs to expose them to very tough UX, user experience. And I hope it will be better in the future. Last 2 points, technology is not yet mature. So be aware that it's still experimental. There are a lot of communication around blockchain and supply chain projects all over the world. Most of them are communication before the project. So don't get yourself got wrong by this. Most companies communicate and then ask themselves how they're going to do it. So there are no, or maybe one that I think of right now, but there are no production phase ready projects for blockchain and supply chain, which means, by the way, that you are not late. And this is quite interesting input and output to have out of this conference. And my last point is maybe more of a call to action and something you have to bring to your company. Is basically, if you are ready to risk hundreds of thousands of dollars in experiments to have a chance to get a step forward, then maybe you can try blockchain. Because it's especially promising. It's working, it's immature right now, but it's promising, and most companies are trying to do something with it right now. But you need to be willing to make this investment. And I think that from a company's perspective, if your budgets are tight, and if you have other priorities, it's not that bad. Do not cry. No, but just try to keep being updated about what the competitors and others in the industry are doing. Try to jump in a consortium if you can, but it's not that bad if you can't invest right now in the technology.